boycotts in South Africa started in protest from the price raise of 4 cents to 5 cents on public buses in Johannesburg, with the goal being to stop the increase of bus fares and increase the wages of the Bantu population. The boycotts lasted from January 7, 1957 to April 1, 1957, spreading to multiple different towns and cities during that time. These included Sophiatown, Lady Selborne, Pretoria, Atteridgeville, Mooiplaats, New Clare, Germiston, and Edenville, but Edenville only participated for a week. Boycotters started the boycott by yelling "Ukuwela," which means "we will not ride," but grew tired after a few weeks and then protested in silence. Some Afrikaners would help the protesters by giving them rides in their cars, but would be harassed along with the protesters by police. The harassment included vehicle searches, demanding of licenses and passes, recording the names of white supporters, and measuring the seats of the cars to make sure the boycotter was not on less than 15 inches of the seat. Both Nelson Mandela, the deputy leader of the African National Congress, and Oliver Tambo, the leader of the African National Congress, would send letters of encouragement to the boycotters. The boycotters were encouraged to stay at home if they grew too tired. Negotiations began when business leaders realized that they were losing profits due to the boycott, and the negotiations were largely unsuccessful for the first months, but eventually prevailed on April 1, 1957. The compromise was that under a bill passed through the South African Parliament, boycotters would only have to pay 4 cents for a bus ticket, while others would still pay the full 5 cents. The boycott would represent a huge economic and political victory, as it showed that black South Africans had more power than perceived.
Leading up to the massacre in 1948, the National Party took over and apartheid began. The following years, acts were passed which began the rise of the National Party's power. Acts in which prohibited marriage between whites and non-whites, in other words called the Immorality Act, the Group Areas Act which allowed segregation, the Bantu's Authority Act which was to create specific placement for those who were Bantu, along with the Bantu Education Act which brought education within South Africa under control of the government. But one of the most important acts that were passed during this time, the act which was the main cause of aggravation in Sharpeville, was the Pass Laws Act. The Pass Laws Act required non-whites to carry passbooks which contained all of their information in order to travel between urban and rural areas. Lastly, were the bus boycotts which began in 1957. Although the bus boycotts originally began to protest the rise of the cost of bus fare, it eventually led to the general idea of anti-apartheid in South Africa, advocating for the need to be liberated and regarded as equal. The origin of the Sharpeville massacre can be brought back to the split of ANC. Afrikaners in the ANC believed that the best hope of liberation was through political self-reliance and a cultural focus that was rooted in African beliefs and traditions. They also believed that all the wealth and land in South Africa be returned to its original, black owners. Matters came to a head in November 1958 when a group of Afrikaners attempted to break up a provincial conference chaired by Oliver Tambo and Orlando Soweto. When they failed to achieve this objective, they announced their departure from the ANC. Small groups such as PAC were given a chance to gain popularity when the treason trial began in 1956. The treason trial effectively removed prominent leaders such as Mandela and Sisulu from the daily running of the organization. The Pan-Africanist Congress, also called PAC, led by Sobukwe, was officially formed in early 1959 as the breakaway group from ANC. PAC's strategy was to hijack some of the campaigns launched by the ANC. Hence, they announced in December 1959 that it planned to initiate a series of mass popular protests against the pass laws. PAC responded by setting the date for its own anti-pass protests for the 21st of March. The protesters were required to present themselves at police stations without their reference books. The point of this protest was to see if the government would arrest them, to put the government in a place where they felt threatened and see how they would retaliate, or it was hoped they would retaliate with defensive reaction to create uproar. Thousands participated in the protests in Vereeniging, motivated by bad living conditions. During the march, police retaliated by firing them with rubber bullets which injured many, the bullets being accompanied by military choppers flying over their heads, though they continued to march towards the police station, singing with determination. After the shooting, People were taken to the police station to be interviewed about the massacre. Once they arrived at the police station, protesters were told to wait, that somebody was going to talk to them. But instead, they were shocked with what they were approached with. Military vehicles began to arrive, armed. Gunshots were fired and people began to run, but elderly, children, and pregnant women were essentially trapped. In total, 69 unarmed demonstrators were killed, including 8 women and 10 children. 186 people were injured. Some had lost their limbs and others followed home and shot. The aftermath was tragic. Bodies left scattered and limbs severed. Those who were taken to the hospital from injuries were told a day later, regardless of how severe their injury, that they were being discharged and being taken back to Sharpeville, their homes. But instead, they were lied to and taken to Boxburg prison. Some women were even put in small rooms with female police officers and hosed down with cold water. In the prisons, these conditions were harsh. They had to sleep on the floor, and some even got sick from the cold water. Following the massacre, ANC leader Chief Luthuli burned his reference book in a powerful act of protest.
Due to the Sharpeville massacre, there was an immediate uproar in the South African black population. In that following week, demonstrations, protest marches, strikes, and riots happened throughout the country. On March 30th, the government declared a state of emergency, detaining 18,000 people, including prominent anti-apartheid activists who were known as members of the Congress Alliance, which included Nelson Mandela and some still administering the treason trial. A storm of international protests followed the Sharpeville shootings, including sympathetic demonstrations in many countries and condemnation by the United Nations. On April 1st, 1960, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 134. The resolution voiced the Council's anger at the policies and actions of the government, offering their sympathies to the family of victims, and called upon the government to initiate measures aimed at bringing racial harmony based on equality and abandoning apartheid. Within a few weeks of the massacre, the South African apartheid government passed legislation, the Unlawful Organizations Act, number 34 of 1960. This allowed for the apartheid government to declare any organization deemed to threaten public order or safety of the public unlawful, immediately banning the ANC and PAC as unlawful organizations. The ANC and its supporters suffered a severe blow as a result of the government's harsh response to the nonviolent protests and the consequent banning of ANC the following month. Therefore, in 1960, after these events, the moment had arrived to reconsider the strategy and switch from passive resistance to armed struggle for members of the ANC. For Mandela, this was also a turning point, stating that if the government's reaction is to crush by naked force our nonviolent struggle, we will have to reconsider our tactics. In my mind, we are closing on this question of a nonviolent policy. Subsequently, MK was launched as the armed wing of ANC. In commemoration, March 21st has been commemorated as Human Rights Day in South Africa since 1996. Sharpeville was the site selected by President Nelson Mandela for signing into law the Constitution of South Africa on December 10, 1996.